Hey, hello and welcome everyone. So in this video, I'm going to go over a review of basically what it is that we've covered since exam 2. So I'm calling this final exam review. Actually, this is just covering these chapters, right? Wages and workers, inequality, market structure and market power, long-run profits, business strategy, pricing strategies, game theory, uncertainty and private information following the Stevenson and Wolfer's text. Now, of course, the final exam is cumulative. I said like 60%, well, for 2021 term, it's going to be 60% on what we've done since exam 2, and then 20% from exam 1, 20% from exam 2. That's not what this is here. I'm focusing on specifically what it is we've covered since exam 2 because the earlier reviews continue to be relevant for the final exam. Okay, so wages and workers. So once again, the way that I'm doing the review is I want this to be relatively self-contained. I want this to kind of remind us of some of the highlights from the chapters. It's not going to be totally as comprehensive as like going over and redoing all the lectures. So, basically what you'd want to do is then like read with your notes or read with a book. And then when you get to a particular area, kind of look and go in greater depth as you're coming across things, kind of reminding yourself of things that you're maybe a little less comfortable with or whatever. All right. So firstly, we're thinking about wages and workers, determination of wages, basically. So employers are looking for human capital. They're trying to determine which workers are likely to be more productive. And that's ultimately what they're interested in, is hiring those with a high skill level. By human capital, we mean accumulated knowledge and skills. So it's education, it's experience specific to that job, so on and so forth. Relative to education, we realize there's kind of two things that happens. Firstly, there's strong evidence suggesting education makes you more productive. You kind of train your brain to be more efficient. Education also can serve as a signal of your ability. And so there's the two aspects to education, kind of directly influencing your human capital and then just signaling that you've got a high level of ability to begin with. The basic idea is so think of like a college degree. It's easier to attain a college degree if you have a higher level of ability. And so if you've got a degree from a prestigious school, then presumably not only do you have the benefit of having worked towards the degree, but you also have to have a high underlying ability in the first place. All right, or on average, it'd be more costly to obtain the degree if you don't have a high underlying ability. Okay, so sometimes employers pay workers more to make workers more productive. So this is called an efficiency wage. The basic idea with an efficiency wage is providing a very strong disincentive to becoming separated from your employer. So the idea is you think of if the present job that you have is paying much higher, much better than anything else that you'd be able to do, then the cost of becoming unemployed is really high because you're not going to be able to do as well as you presently are. So then you'll work harder so that you keep that job. And so the higher wage provides an incentive to keep working hard so that you don't lose that higher wage. Some jobs pay more because effort is costlier to monitor. This would be one of the stories where, maybe it's not very easy for the firm itself to monitor the workers. So it wants to provide this internal sort of incentive where workers realize, oh, whatever is this job is one that I'm not going to be able to find elsewhere. And so I want to make sure I'm able to keep this comparatively good job. Okay, so the other thing is the idea of, or another aspect to wage differences is compensating differential. So compensating differential goes in two directions. It can be a premium that you're paid to do a distasteful job, or it can be a penalty. Basically, you're paying a lower price. You're giving your employer a discount because your job is enjoyable. So compensating differential is the differences in wages required to offset desirable or undesirable aspects of a job. Basically, compensating differentials encourage people to take unpleasant jobs is usually how we're thinking about it. But it does go the other direction where you're essentially offering your labor at a discount because there's other aspects of your job you might like, such as my job working at the amusement park. Okay, so another thing that determines or influences wages would be government regulations, in particular licensing, which restricts the labor supply. So the more difficult it is, think of like passing the bar. So the more difficult it is to get a law degree or being board certified as a physician, more difficult it is to do these things, the fewer people that are offering their labor at all possible wages. And so that can lead towards a higher wage overall. Minimum wage, obviously, is another government regulation. Occupational licenses set education and training required for specific jobs. Sometimes this could be like internal to the discipline. Sometimes it kind of crafted around around union adoption of licenses or something like that. Basically, by decreasing the labor supply, the license requirement raises the wages of those who do get the licenses. Other determinants of wage differences, discrimination. So we've got 3 different forms of discrimination that we're differentiating between. So there's prejudice, so a preconceived bias against a group that's not based on reason or experience, which is contrasted from implicit bias, which is judgment shaped by the unconscious attribution of particular qualities to specific groups, which is contrasted from statistical discrimination, which is using observations about the average characteristics of a group to make inferences about an individual. Then we transition on to think about inequality. So in inequality, we have a lot of different measures of inequality. So it's like income, wealth, permanent income, spending inequality, intergenerational mobility. Income inequality, income is the money you receive in a period of time. So this is like a flow. It's a flow variable. It's the money you receive in a particular period of time. It's coming in. Wealth is like accrued. This is like the stock. So it's all the assets you have. So it's the assets you currently have. So there's clearly like income inequality and wealth inequality are related, but it can sometimes go to the other direction where you can have people with a high degree of wealth who have very low income, right? And people with a high income could have presumably still low wealth, such as like, maybe you first graduate from college and you get a job that's above the average or the median income for average individual in your society. You'd still presumably wouldn't have much wealth because you'd just have had that job for it'd be like the first year or something like that. Permanent income inequality, this is the income over your average lifetime. So permanent income is your average lifetime income. And so it's the other thing that's relevant relative to thinking about income inequality is like people tend to be the poorest at the younger levels, and then as you go through your life, remember like your peak earning years are like age 50 or something like that, and so both wealth and income tend to peak kind of in the middle. So anyway, what we're really interested in is not like the difference between your present situation versus where you'll be in the future, but we care about like the average overall as well. Spending inequality, intergenerational mobility is the extent to which the economic status of children is independent of the economic status of their parents. And societies vary in terms of the level of intergenerational mobility. There's some interesting research in economic history, but about comparing over time. And there's anyways, it's a really, really interesting and disheartening things, actually, of course. Comparing measures of inequality. So there's much more inequality of wealth than of income. And part of that is because, the income so it's unusual to receive very, very high levels of income, right? Usually like the people who are really wealthy would have kind of different, assets, wouldn't quite have the same type of income coming in. So there's more inequality of wealth than income. Permanent income is maybe a better measure of living standards, right? We really care about like what's your average income over your lifetime. There's less inequality of spending than of income. Think about it, like people kind of spend about the same for necessities to sustain their lives. Of course, there's a whole variation, but there's less inequality of spending because people need to eat and drink and have about the same amount as like everybody else, and so much less inequality of spending than income. And then those who have additional resources that what's not get spent goes into savings, which then accrues wealth, and so that's the other kind of piece here. Inequality of income, wealth, and spending measure outcomes. Intergenerational mobility measures inequality of opportunity. And that's, so really important distinction, especially because policymakers, of course, are interested in kind of both directions. Poverty line. So an income level below which a family is defined to be in poverty. In 2018, the federal poverty line was $25,700 for a family of 4 and $16,300 for a family of 2. Poverty rate is the percentage of people whose family income is below the poverty line. Poverty rate in 2017 was 12.3% of the population, and the official poverty rate's not changed much over time. This right here, all these numbers, this is just to give us kind of a nice estimates, kind of get us a sense of like what's involved here. I would never write a question where you have to tell me what was the poverty rate in 2017, right? That'd be a bad question. So also, just for point of reference, my salary in 2007 to 2008, when I was an academic advisor at the University of Arizona, with a master's in higher education, was $29,400. for just me living alone in Tucson. And that was hard. That was difficult. That was like difficult. Like, well, part of it is like taxes, of course, and then the state of Arizona takes out money for retirement, and before you know it, like I had basically enough to pay for my rent, which was like $600 a month for a studio apartment. It's like one big thing. Didn't even have separate rooms. Had a separate bathroom, I guess, and then I had a little bit money left over for like food and groceries and stuff like that. But anyway, so this is So think about what it takes to be in poverty, and then what the kind of experience of living at that level is, and that's like really important for thinking about policy and coming up with motivation to address inequality. Okay, so how is poverty compared? Absolute poverty judges the adequacy of resources relative to the absolute standard of living. Relative poverty judges poverty relative to the material living standards of your contemporary society. Relative poverty measures will say that more people are in poverty. So absolute poverty is just saying like how much do you need to sustain yourself? It's like subsistence. But then relative poverty is saying, okay, well, but how are you compared to everybody else? And so relative poverty measures say more people are in poverty, so the basic idea is like maybe it's relatively easy to get whatever we're judging as enough to sustain yourself, but then like what level of well-being do you need to be kind of like, I don't know, like fully kind of participating in all the opportunities available to the rest of society, and money is required for that. Okay, so most poverty spells are short, but most poor people are in long-term poverty. So most spells are short. For instance, like I wasn't in poverty. It's just me at that cell. I spent a year there, and then I decided I need to go to grad school for something else, and so here I am. But most poor people are in poverty long-term, and then there's kind of lack of opportunities getting out. What's the biggest risk is losing a job. Health considerations are also important. Other things, household income changes, divorce, birth of a child, moving out. More than half of Americans will experience poverty at some point in their life. Right? All right. How does the government reduce inequality and poverty? So there's a social safety net. So this is cash, assistance, goods, services provided by the government to better the lives of those at the bottom of the income distribution. Social insurance, government provided insurance against bad outcomes such as unemployment, which we kind of talk a lot about unemployment insurance during the pandemic. Illness, disability, outliving your savings. Progressive tax is a tax where those with more income tend to pay a higher share of their income in taxes. U.S. has a progressive income tax where at the very bottom you pay almost nothing, and then it rises up to something, I don't know, it's like 40% or something like that at the high end of income. So that's a progressive tax. Not all taxes are progressive. Some are regressive. Regressive would be those at the bottom pay more than those at the top. For some reasons, Social Security tends to have some regressive properties because those at the bottom tend to pay in more, but people and then tend not to live as long, so they don't receive the full benefits they've been paying into. It's not like by design regressive. It just like in practice tends to be. So that's a problem to kind of think about. All right, so moving on to market structure and market power. Market structure is important because it shapes your market power. Thinking about an individual firm. Market power is basically a downward sloping demand curve. You face like your demand curve is the market demand curve. It's the extent to which a seller can charge higher prices without losing many sales to competing businesses. So there's different types of market structure. Perfect competition faces a horizontal demand curve for each individual, so there's no market power. Monopoly has a massive amount of market power. And then oligopoly and monopolistic competition have a little bit of market power. So perfect competition, many buyers and many sellers, identical products, no barriers to entry, full information. Monopoly is like a single seller, and then there's barriers to entry. Oligopoly is like a few strong firms that could have been a monopoly in their own right. And then monopolistic competition is something kind of like perfect competition, but because of product differentiation, that's the key difference. Because of product differentiation, each has a little bit of market power over their own thing. So this example doesn't work. This is misleading, but in a way that I think is helpful to your understanding, just to understand what I mean here. So look at Apple and the iPhone. I say it's misleading because Apple's not a monopolistically competitive market. It's an oligopoly, but so Apple has a monopoly over the iPhone. right, has a monopoly over the iPhone. It's got market power, monopoly power over the iPhone, but not over other smartphones, Samsung and so on. There's other smartphones, right? That's what happens with monopolistic competition. You're a monopoly over your niche, but then there's other things within that product category, and there's lots of other competitors. Just like how Apple has a monopoly over the iPhone, and that only matters to the extent that people believe there's no substitutes to the iPhone. But there's other products, and they definitely don't have a monopoly over smartphones more generally. Here's a spectrum of market power with less market power at one end and then monopoly at the other end. And so the sources of market power are, well, many competitors, no competitors, going from one end to the other end. So there's many competitors, so there's no market power. When there's few competitors, then you have increasing market power until there's a lot of market power. Product differentiation is the other thing. So competitors and product differentiation are the key sources of market power. If you have identical products, you have no market power. And then if you have a unique product that takes up the whole category, that's when you have the most amount of market power. You could think of almost like a Venn diagram or something where you have identical products, like everybody's in one category, and then you split into like these little bubbles where everybody's got their own product differentiation, and then ultimately there's only like one of the bubbles grows and kind of takes up the whole thing, and then that's your unique product. That's the monopoly situation. All right, the structure with the least market power is perfect competition. At the other end, monopolies have the most market power. They're the only business selling a unique product. Both perfect competition and monopoly are rare. That doesn't make those models useless. Actually, it's really interesting to think of a market where we see a lot of competition, realize it's not perfectly competitive, and then ask the questions about the assumptions, which ones fail. Usually it's like barriers to entry or it's product differentiation. Sometimes it could be information. And then think about like monopoly as well. It could be like you could have a situation where a firm wouldn't necessarily be a natural monopolist like Walmart, but in a small town, you might have a monopoly from Walmart because of the geographic distance between the next rival. Okay, most businesses operate in imperfectly competitive markets, imperfect competition. So basically monopolistic competition and oligopoly. So this is where you face at least some competitors. You're selling products that differ at least a little bit from those competitors. There's a trade-off between price and quantity for our firms with market power. It's a trade-off between selling a large quantity, a large volume, versus making more money on each item, right? Think about the things that affect revenue. Price and quantity. Price times quantity is revenue. As you raise the quantity, you lower the price, right? And vice versa. You could use your demand curve and then the marginal revenue curve to think about this trade-off. The firm's demand gives us the quantity buyers demand from the individual firm as it changes the price. Market demand is the quantity demanded across all firms. Firm demand is the quantity demanded from your firm. Individual demand is the quantity demanded from an individual buyer. And then your firm's market power shapes your firm's demand curve. If you have no market power, your demand curve's horizontal. If you have a lot of market power, it becomes more vertical. It could become even perfectly vertical if you have a lot of market power and you have a good with no substitutes that people need. So usually you think of like pharmaceuticals or something like that. Insulin. Marginal revenue reflects the output effect minus the discount effect. So the output effect is the revenue increase from selling one more unit. As you sell a larger volume, revenue rises. That's the output effect. And then, I wonder if I think I lost something. Yeah, this is the output of price. The output effect isn't just price. All right, discount effect is the revenue loss from cutting the price of all units sold. So discount effect is as we're selling a larger quantity. Output effect means revenue is going to go up, but as we're selling that larger quantity, the price is going to go down. And so that's the discount effect. So the discount effect is the change in price times quantity. Output effect should be what? Should be change in quantity times price. Marginal revenue. This is bad. So let me just kind of. I'm confusing myself and trying to remember this. Sorry, I do these slides with LaTeX, and then if I have the wrong things, then they don't display. So anyway, all right. So check the text or the slides for those. All right. But actually, like, I'm not going to give you a question where you have to know, like, the question that I would give you would ask you like this, or it would ask you this, right? The conceptual version. Okay. So how do sellers determine their prices and quantities? Keep selling until your marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That's step one. Remember, the rational rule for sellers tells us to sell one more of the item if the marginal revenue is greater than or equal to the cost. Then go up to the demand curve to find the price. Set your price on the demand curve. I say I say that prices come from demand curves. Professor Wilfer says, find the monopoly's quantity, then look up. And so both are right. The big thing is you don't want to look at the marginal revenue curve because that's not where prices are coming from. You look to the marginal revenue curve to find the quantity, and then you got to go up to the demand curve. Prices come from demand curves. Competition leads to lower prices and a higher quantity. Market power leads to businesses to purchase a lower quantity and sell at a higher price. And that's the underproduction problem. That's where the profits come from, right? Market power allows the firms to restrict quantity. By the law of demand, that means the price is higher. That's good for them because price is above marginal cost. That's markup. That's where profits are coming from. It's bad for consumers because now you've produced a smaller quantity than the market would as competitive. The higher prices are a problem for customers, but a benefit to sellers. Economists, we think, all right, so it's not great that customers are paying more, but the sellers are gaining, and so kind of washes out. But the smaller quantity is just going to be bad overall because that's what's going to lead to the inefficiency. That's what's going to lead to what we call deadweight loss. See deadweight loss on the graph. That's going to be the triangle that's under the demand curve, and then between the monopoly quantity and the competitive quantity. And the reason why it's a problem, the reason why it's not best for society is over those units that are not produced. The demand curve is higher than the marginal cost curve. Remember, the demand curve, theory of demand, is the theory of marginal benefit, which tells us that the marginal benefit to consumers is higher than the cost to produce those units, but nevertheless, they're not produced because doing so would sacrifice profits for the firm. All right, patents also provide an incentive to engage in research, and that can create a circumstance where this is sort of reinforcing market power and innovation. All right, long run profits. So we want to make a distinction between accounting profit and economic profit. Accounting profit is the total revenue minus out-of-pocket financial costs. So out-of-pocket financial costs are our explicit costs. These are like direct cash outlays. So accounting profit is just like total revenue minus like cash outlays, explicit costs. Economic profit is going to further consider also implicit costs, opportunity costs. So the opportunity cost of running a business is going to be like the foregone use of wages and interest and other sorts of things. Right? So economic profit is then going to be smaller than accounting profit because it's going to start with accounting profit and then it's going to deduct the implicit costs. Average revenue is just revenue per unit. So take total revenue, divide by the quantity. Average cost is the cost per unit. So take your firm's total costs, divide by the quantity. The profit margin is the price less average cost. It's price minus average cost is going to be the profit margin. It's a per unit measure. And remember, price is equal to average revenue. If where pricing is coming from set marginal revenue to marginal cost, go up to the demand curve to get that price. So standard monopoly pricing and in competitive market pricing is price is equal to average revenue. All right, economic profit is important for the long run analysis of firm entry. We have short run and long run. Basically, in the short run, you have at least one variable you have at least one input that's fixed, and then one cost that's fixed. Usually it's capital. And then in the long run, all costs are variable. Long run analysis is useful for planning purposes, such as planning how much to invest in a new plant and equipment for business expansion, because we're going to worry about what's going to happen to the price in the long run. It's actually going to crash down to the minimum of average cost, because free entry is going to push down economic profits to zero in the long run. That's definitely true in perfect competition. It's also true in the very long run for monopoly, because we'd assume that there's no barriers to entry that are completely impenetrable. Free entry occurs when there's no factors making it particularly difficult or costly for a business to enter or exit an industry. And so you could think of I think in the text we have the example of the historic monopoly IBM. There wasn't like a whole bunch of entry into doing exactly what IBM was doing. It's just that the technology kind of left them behind. Although IBM Watson is interesting, and so maybe IBM will rise again in the future. But anyway, what can happen is you can have some type of innovation that even if you're not entering directly that industry, like the airline industry, innovations affecting airlines, right? It's not coming up with new ways to fly or whatever, so much as, well, we have like Zoom and we have video conferencing, which removes kind of the need for a lot of business travel. All right, rational rule for entry says you should enter a market if you expect to earn a positive economic profit that occurs when price exceeds average cost. Rational rule for exit says to exit the market if you expect to earn a negative economic profit that occurs if price is less than average cost. Free exit ensures industries won't remain unprofitable in the long run because firms will leave. Now, you can have short-run profits in the competitive market and short-run losses. It's just, and that's measuring if price is below average cost. Maybe then you're making a loss. Maybe you stay in the market, and you would if and only if it's a short-run situation and your price is still above average variable cost, which means you're covering the cost of ingredients or inputs, just not your cost of rent, for instance. Free entry pushes price down towards average cost. Free exit pushes price up towards average cost. In the long run, with free entry and free exit, price equals average cost. And that's our outcome. That's our long run outcome. The firm's ongoing profitability depends on barriers to entry, and basically like how long are those barriers to entry going to prevent entry? And then if they prevent entry for a really long time, then how long does it take before a new industry replaces the one that we're in, basically? So how do firms deter entry? Well, firstly, you can come up with ways to create customer lock-in. This is a demand side strategy. So this is like you sign a 2-year contract with your cell phone provider, right? That locks you in. You could cancel, but it's kind of a pain. Develop unique cost advantages. These are supply side strategies, maybe like learning by doing or something like that. Mobilize the government to prevent entries. This is like regulatory strategies. This is like taxis trying to get government to regulate Uber and Lyft, or bed and breakfast trying to get regulations against Airbnb. Convince potential entrants that you'll crush them. So deterrent strategies like building up excess capacity that you could use to then flood the market and lower the price. So like our demand side strategies, switching costs can lock in your customers. These are things that make it costly for customers to switch from buying from another business. Reputation and goodwill can keep your customers loyal because they think of, well, maybe I'm not going to be able to have the same experience from a rival. And then network effects means your product becomes more useful the more people who use it. This is like Facebook right now. There's just so many people on the Facebook network that even though, lots of students, like you might even yourself be able to create a social networking platform that could rival Facebook, but it's just almost impossible because you could never grow the network fast enough to make it sustainable. Supply side strategies, learning by doing means experience yields efficiency gains. So you get basically better at doing the job. You can do it more efficiently. Benefits of mass production can keep small firms from being competitive entrants. This is like, you're not going to build a new operating system to rival Windows, because Windows can make billions of copies and put it on every machine. And now there's just like, who's going to adopt your new operating system, even if it's superior? And so there's just not that many remaining customers. So mass production can keep small firms from being competitive because you wouldn't be able to produce at a scale to justify the large fixed costs, basically. Research and development creates cost advantages by driving down your cost curve. Relationship with suppliers can get cheaper inputs, especially maybe you have like relationship-specific investments between the two of you. Access to key inputs can freeze out your competitors. Yeah, if you have, like if you're building batteries and for electric cars and you have all the lithium, for instance, now that can make it very difficult to launch a rival electric vehicle company. All right, government policy and regulation. Patents give you the right to be the only producer. Regulations make it difficult for new businesses to enter your market. Compulsory licenses can limit competition. You might even some of the regulation you might ask for is a license that you've got, but it can be really difficult for rivals to obtain. Lobbying can create new regulatory barriers. Exactly. Yeah. Then we'll talk about business strategy. So the basic idea is we want to think of what kind of strategy can maintain or what like affects long-run profitability. So determinants of long-run profitability includes the type and intensity of competitive forces and the decisions that you make in response, like your strategic response. So we'll use Porter's 5 forces framework to summarize competition in the market by looking at the source of profitability and then looking at the threats to profitability. So the 5 forces are the potential entrants. So who else could come into the market? The bargaining power of suppliers, bargaining power of customers, potential substitutes kind of for the industry as a whole, and then the existing competitive balance. So if we're thinking about like an online toy retailer, right? Potential entrants would be if a new website launches and somebody else starts selling educational toys. Supplier power would be things that would create more supplier power would be, do you have only a few toy manufacturers? If so, there's a lot of supplying bargaining power, and then that's a threat to profitability. Or maybe you have lots of manufacturers to turn to. Or what about delivery? So do you have only a few companies that could deliver, such as FedEx and UPS, or are there lots of suppliers? Right? Amazon solved that problem by making their own delivery system. Are customers buying a large amount, or are they buying a small amount? It depends. Are you selling direct to individuals, or are you selling to large corporate buyers like, Target chain or something like that? Potential substitutes. So what are people doing outside? So for the educational toy industry, maybe like the worst kind of substitute would be like educational video games or something like that, like tablet games. And then existing competition. So what's the competitive balance already, right? How many firms are currently operating? Obviously, more rivals are going to mean more intense competition. Most extreme case is perfect competition. But there's different ways to compete. You can compete in terms of price and in terms of product. So price competition is like trying to win customers by offering low prices and undercutting rivals. It's easiest to do when the products are similar, when the prices are observable, and then when switching costs are low, so you can actually lower prices and then capture more customers. Non-price competition is like trying to win by differentiating your product, so trying to create a niche. This makes it harder for rivals to win your customers with a price cut because their customers aren't viewing that now relatively cheaper product that's sold by your rival as being a legitimate substitute to what you're selling. So that's why product differentiation is really important for generating market power. With no price differentiation, even one competitor can force your economic profits to zero. This should be no product differentiation. With no product differentiation, even one competitor can force your economic profits to zero. This is harkening back to like the identical products Bertrand game. So this is like fierce price competition. Will drive prices down to marginal cost. Why? With no product differentiation, there's an irresistible incentive for your rival to undercut you. So product differentiation reduces the incentive for your rival to undercut you. So you should try to increase product differentiation wherever possible. That raises bargaining power and profitability. But what if you're in an industry where there's no direct product differentiation for the item itself? Then you have to offer a complement, like a complementary service or something like that. So then you can offer differentiation in terms of the ancillary service that's coming with buying from you. Non-price competition. So you want to attract sticky customers, those who aren't going to switch in response to changes made by rivals. So through product differentiation, maybe you have different features, maybe you have higher quality, better customer service, right? Thinking about complements to what you're offering. Design features, style, reliability, location and convenience, and then advertising. So how should you position? How do you choose the set of attributes, features, service, brand, image, and so on for your product? Or how should you best position your product relative to competitors? You have to think about demand side and supply side considerations. Like demand side is like you want to offer something that a lot of customers want. The supply side consideration is you want it to be different from your rivals, right? As different from competitors as possible. So you could locate some distance from your rival, but then you concede some customers to them. So you get the most customers actually by being just right next to your rival, because then this is like the moving to the middle sort of story when there's no price competition. The other thing you can do is differentiate and then split up the spectrum. All right, how to position the demand side consideration? Well, you want to increase your share of potential customers, maybe increase the quantity that you're selling. Supply side, you want to be far from your competitor, increase market power and prices, increase your profit margin. Ultimately, real-world entrepreneurs are choosing product positioning to balance the considerations of being by customers, getting a large quantity, and then having differentiation that allows you to drive up the price. Remember, it's hard to drive up both quantity and price at the same time. Can't do it unless you have like a demand shifter that shifts the demand curve. All right, how to advertise. Search goods use informative advertising. So a search good is one that you can evaluate before buying. Search characteristics are like product specifications or the product description, stuff like that. Informative advertising is useful then to inform customers about a product or some of its characteristics. Persuasive advertising is trying to persuade. So trying to manipulate customers into believing they'll enjoy a particular product. That's useful for like experience characteristics. Usually it's not that informative, and some advertising could be wasteful, sometimes even purposefully wasteful. It's saying like, we have such a good product that we can make this completely frivolous advertisement because our product is just that good. All right. Your next best alternative, thinking about business strategy and bargaining, determines your bargaining power. So your next best alternative is the value of your best position, best option outside of this deal. Your bargaining power is the ability to negotiate a better deal to get it closer to your ideal price. The other side's next best alternative determines their bargaining power, right? So Amazon was able to increase their bargaining power against like FedEx and UPS by creating their own in-house delivery system. Because if they don't have a contract or if they don't have an agreement with them or with the U.S. Postal Service, they can kind of do it themselves. That increased their next best alternative and therefore increased their bargaining power. Once you've made a relationship-specific investment, the other side might try to renegotiate so they can get a better deal. And then you get a worse one, of course. This is a hold-up problem. So relationship-specific investments are investments that are more valuable if the current business relationship continues. So this would be like you have software, like proprietary software that's going to deal specifically with integrating into whatever is your distribution, your logistics or distribution firm's system. And maybe it's something tracking inventory or whatever. And if you were to go to a different supplier, different distribution network or logistics team or whatever, now you'd have to have different equipment and different human capital in terms of interpreting the computer system and so on and so forth. That's a relationship-specific investment. And realizing that you now have this really strong incentive to maintain the relationship, they might demand a better deal for them. All right, sophisticated pricing techniques. So with price discrimination, the idea is you want to increase the price each person will pay. With group pricing, you can boost profits by offering group discounts strategically. And then the hurdle method is try to target discounts to those who value them. These are all forms of price discrimination, which is basically selling the same thing at different prices to different people. Price discrimination, so sell the same product at different prices, set prices close to or just below their marginal benefits that they buy, but that you extract most of the consumer surplus. The consumer's reservation price is the max the consumer will pay for a product. And the idea is if you have that information, you can charge a price right up to the reservation price and will say that they'll buy because they're better off buying than not buying, or at least indifferent between the two. Perfect price discrimination is where you charge each customer exactly its reservation price. And then there's this gives us two profit boosting objectives. So charge the highest price you possibly can for each sale, and then make every possible sale where there's a customer whose marginal benefit exceeds your marginal cost. If you remember from earlier, if you make every possible sale where there's a customer whose marginal benefit exceeds your marginal cost, now there's no deadweight loss. So perfect price discrimination is equally efficient, as is the competitive market. In the competitive market, all the economic surplus goes to consumers, well, assuming a horizontal marginal cost curve. And in the perfect price discrimination world, all the economic surplus goes to the seller. Group pricing, this is like third degree price discrimination. So this is price discrimination by charging different prices to different groups of people. So this is effective if they have the groups are effective if they have a relationship to the expected marginal benefit. So the basic idea is maybe children and adults, and we'd expect adults are going to have a higher willingness to pay, so we can charge a higher price. Children are going to have a lower willingness to pay, charge a lower price. Group pricing involves offering different prices that differ by age, location, purchase history, other identifiable characteristics. So location, locals versus visitor versus tourists. Purchase history, are they a repeat buyer or not? Examples, well, books are cheaper in India than in the US. Internet companies charge lower prices for residential rather than business service. And movie theaters offer student discounts because we expect students are going to be more price sensitive. As you might imagine, price sensitivity clues us into elasticity. Basic idea with group pricing is you want to offer the discount to the elastic demanders and charge a price premium from the inelastic demanders. This is how this works. First, decide what quantity. So keep selling until marginal revenue in that market segment equals your marginal cost. Then what price do you charge? Well, go up to the demand curve for that segment to find the highest price you can set and sell to this quantity. In the equilibrium, the marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Marginal revenue in segment 1 equals marginal cost equals marginal revenue in segment 2, because your costs of serving the two segments of the market are arguably the same. So MR equals MC in both markets is the outcome. Basically what you do with third degree price discrimination is just you solve your standard monopoly maximization problem separate for each segment of the market. Hurdle method, offer lower prices to buyers who are willing to overcome some hurdle or obstacle. The idea is like set the hurdle high so that the high marginal benefit customers just find it too costly. It's not worth their time. And then the low marginal benefit customers will go over the hurdle. So they'll pay the low price. High marginal benefit customers, they don't even bother. They'll pay the high price. And so this allows self-selection. Self-selection is second degree price discrimination. This is where like everybody sees the same coupons and then it's just either worth your time to clip coupons or it's not, right? And so that's the idea. It's self-selection. That's second degree price discrimination. We offer a menu of options and then individuals choose which amongst the menu is going to be right for them. Quantity discount, a per unit price that's lower when you buy a larger quantity. So different types of customers buy different quantities, such as at Costco or Sam's or BJ's Wholesale or whatever. Bundling creates a hurdle to getting the second good at a lower price. You have to buy buy the whole bundle. Cable TV pricing is a bundling strategy. So sometimes it's like bundling together cable, internet, and then phone. Other times it's just like the pricing of the channels themselves, right? All right, so then we'll think about game theory. So for game theory, we distinguish between simple games, normal form games, matrices are represented by matrices, and then extensive form games. This is like our sequential timed games, game trees. So for the simple games, for like our matrix games, firstly, consider all the possible outcomes. Use a payoff table to kind of enumerate who are the players, what are their strategies, what are the possible payoffs. So list the payoffs in each cell. Then think about the what ifs separately. Say hypothetically, if the column player chose their left column, how does the row player best respond? Hypothetically, if the column player chose their right column, how does the row player best respond? Play best responses. Your best response is the choice that yields the highest payoff given the other player's choices. And then put yourself in someone else's shoes that just like look at the other perspective. So now, hypothetically, if the row player chose their top row, how does the column player respond? Do they take their left or right column? Or hypothetically, if the row player chose their bottom row, how does the column player best respond? Their left or right column. And then you put a check mark by the payoff. 2 check marks in a cell indicates a Nash equilibrium. A Nash equilibrium happens when you both choose your best response. 2 check marks in a cell is a Nash equilibrium because you're putting a check mark where the best response is. So if you have 2 check marks in a cell, they're both choosing their best response. Nash equilibrium is a choice where each player makes Nash equilibrium happens in which the choice that each player makes is a best response to the other choices that players are making. So the idea with Nash equilibrium, it's not like you're not winning the game. That's not a well-defined concept in game theory, winning and losing. It's not that you're maximizing payoffs. It's not that you're profitable. It's not that you're eliminating losses or any of those things. All Nash equilibrium cares about is, are you best responding and are they best responding? And if you're mutually best responding, we have a Nash equilibrium. Use the checkmark method. If you put a check next to each player's best response, the outcome of the checkmark from each player is our Nash equilibrium. You can ensure that you have a Nash equilibrium by verifying whether anybody can individually do better by switching. Because if they can, they're not best responding. All right, so then we have coordination games. These are games where you have multiple equilibria, typically like on a diagonal. Our solution to coordination problems, the coordination problem is if we have 2 equilibrium, we don't know which one to end up at. So we can solve this with communication. We can solve this with focal points, so some type of external convention that we'll defer to, culture, norms. Focal point is a cue from outside the game that helps you coordinate on the specific equilibrium. Like, what side of the street do you drive on? Oh, you know based on which country you're in, right? So that's a focal point. And then laws and regulations can make different types of behaviors focal. Right? Do you wear a mask or not wear a mask? And then the law and regulation or whatever is the policy of the organization can help solve the coordination problem and get us in either the all mask or the no mask equilibrium. Okay, so game trees. Now we're thinking about extensive form games like simultaneous timing is typically what we're doing with matrix games. This is where the players are choosing without knowing what the rival has done. With game trees, we're typically thinking about sequential timing, where you can observe what the rival's done before you made your choice. You actually can do simultaneous time games with a game tree, but I don't want to introduce that because that'll just be kind of confusing. But the basic idea is our game tree shows all the possible outcomes, shows how the game plays out over time, with the first move forming forming the trunk, subsequent choice branching out, and finally the leaves showing all the possible outcomes. I'm not going to use this language, trunk, branches, and leaves for the exam. It's colorful and maybe it's helpful, vivid, but that's not how I think about it. I think about it in terms of like edges and nodes and end nodes, but you don't know that because you didn't take the advanced game theory class. So we're just going to talk about like players and their strategies, right? Okay, so how do we solve these games? We look forward and reason backwards. So look forward in games that play out over time. You should look forward to anticipate the likely consequences of your choices, then reason backwards. So here's how we actually solve the game. You go to the end of the game, analyze the last period, and determine best responses. Use this to figure out what happens then in the second to last period, and keep reasoning backward until you see all the consequences that follow from today's decision. That's called solving by backward induction. I've actually got so if you're struggling with that, I've got a couple of videos on my YouTube. So you'd do the search for like extensive games or backward induction, I think were keywords that I had. And then that can help in simple game tree games. Prune the tree to see what's likely to happen. So basically, like you're going to cross off the not best responses and then highlight the best responses. And the basic idea is we start at the end of the game, we highlight the best response, cross off not the best response, and then when we go back to the preceding player, when they're looking forward, they're not even they're knowing that the not best response never gets played, so they're not even going to consider those payoffs. They're only looking forward to the highlighted path because they know that when called upon to play, that future player is going to play their best response. So you know where the game's going. All right, first mover advantage is about the benefits of commitment. Second mover advantage is about the benefits of flexibility. So the second mover advantage is a strategic advantage that can follow from taking an action that adapts to your rival's choice. So different industries have different characteristics. There's a first mover advantage in operating systems. So Microsoft has a big first mover advantage, huge first mover advantage that Apple is surviving, but not able to, at least so far, not able to take over. Although Apple's operating system in the early 80s was, anyway, so this is like the old joke when I was in middle school or whatever. The joke was like Windows 95 is like Mac 88 or something. Anyway, so second mover advantage, okay, that'd be like Facebook relative to MySpace, right? So MySpace moves first. Facebook observes what MySpace did and then was able to do it more successfully. What if games are repeated? Well, a one-shot game is a strategic interaction that occurs just once. A repeated game is where you face the same strategic interaction with the same rivals and the same payoff successively. That's important because this makes reputation and the path of play really matter. All right, so finitely repeated games, we can look forward and reason backwards. So you can solve by backward induction. This would be like, we're going to repeat the game like 3 times or 4 times. You go to the last period and then walk back. A finitely repeated game is one where you face the same strategic interaction a fixed number of times. Indefinitely repeated game or an infinite game is where you face the same strategic interaction an unknown number of times. So here you need a strategic plan that lists how you respond to any possible situation. A strategic plan is a list of instructions to describe how to respond to any possible situation. Actually, like in an infinitely repeated game, the strategies are super complicated because you have to say, like, what are you going to do at every possible point when you're called upon to play? So very quickly, you can have more possible strategies than atoms in the universe. So there's a problem. So instead, what we do is we'd say something like, you're like a grim trigger strategy. So like in a repeated prisoner's dilemma, you cooperate until somebody defects and then you just always defect. And that strategy, simple strategy, tells us what you're going to do everywhere. It's like, has everyone been cooperating? They have. Oh, good. We're just going to keep cooperating. Has somebody defected? Oh, okay. So now we're just going to defect forever, right? So that kind of solves the problem of at some unknown stage of the game in the future, we still know how to play if you have a strategy that just says. Another strategy, not a good one, would just be like always cooperate. Why is it not a good one? It's not a good one because if you're always cooperating, your rival at some point is going to figure that out and they're just always going to defect. So, all right. So the grim trigger strategy punishes your rival for not cooperating. So if other players have cooperated in all previous rounds, you cooperate. If any player is defected, then you'll defect. This actually promotes cooperation. Sounds like it wouldn't at first, but it actually promotes cooperation. All right. Then we talk about uncertainty. Every choice involves risk. You can face risk whenever the outcome is uncertain. Because of diminishing marginal utility, the risks are more likely to be worth taking if the reward is huge, stakes are low, and you're not very risk averse. You can reduce risk by risk spreading, diversification, insurance, hedging, and gathering information. Basically, you want to evaluate payoffs and probabilities carefully by avoiding the biases of overconfidence, availability, anchoring, representativeness, focusing illusion, and loss aversion. All right, and lastly, private information. So adverse selection when sellers know more than buyers. So discover how sellers' private information can reduce the quality of goods for sale and distort market outcomes. This is like the used car market, where we expect the prospect of bad cars drives out the market for good. Adverse selection when buyers know more. Discover how buyers' private information can drive up sellers' costs and distort market outcomes. This is like the insurance market. So those with better information about their likelihood to file a claim are more likely to want the expensive policy and then file expensive claims. Moral hazard. So the problem of hidden actions. So recognize and solve the problems that arise when some actions are hidden. This is like the opportunistic behavior, or like the principal agent problem. So adverse selection of sellers can cause the market to collapse. This is where the mix of goods skews towards more low quality goods when buyers can't observe quality. Reason why that happens is because buyers are going to just assume the quality to be equal to whatever is the average quality, like the randomly selected quality. So that based on their belief about the distribution of good and bad quality goods. The problem is, if they believe that there's bad quality goods, that downgrades the amount that they're willing to pay. And if that falls below how much a seller of a good quality good is willing to accept, then the good quality sellers leave the market and you only have low quality sellers. So that's why the mix tends to be skewed more towards low quality. Solutions. Buyers can learn from third-party verification, so Carfax. Sellers can signal their product quality, so maybe through guarantees or something like that. Government can increase information or weed out low quality, like they could prevent low quality or make like minimum requirements or some threshold to be able to cross to be able to sell. Increase information. This is particularly useful in like financial industry. Adverse selection of buyers can cause the market to collapse as well. So this is the tendency for the mix of buyers to be skewed towards more high-cost buyers. This makes it hard for some people to buy the products they want, right? If the only people buying insurance are those with high costs or lots of claims, then insurers aren't going to want to sell as many policies. It can make it difficult for the people who need it to be able to buy. So the insurance industry tries to write contracts in a way that'll attract a lot of low risk, a lot of low cost consumers that are risk averse. Solutions to adverse selection of buyers. So sellers can use information that's related to buyers' likely costs, like kind of like a screening sort of thing. This is like getting a discount on your car insurance for your college GPA grades and stuff like that. Sellers can offer different contracts, so buyers can separate themselves. This is a little bit like second-degree price discrimination because you have self-selection. And then government can increase information or directly reduce adverse selection. Directly reduce adverse selection, like in the case of if there's an individual mandate to have health insurance, like then everybody has to buy, whether or not they are, regardless of their belief about their underlying need. Economists call the choices that you make because your actions are not fully observed moral hazard. Moral hazard occurs because you're partially insulated from the consequences of your actions. So this means that you can your actions impose costs, and not all of them are imposed on you. So this would be like when I was working at the amusement park, I was paid hourly, and I didn't work as hard as I would have if I was paid for each ticket that I tore on my ride. And so what's the problem? Well, some of those costs are borne by the amusement park because they're getting fewer riders than they would have if I was really eager about attracting people to my ride. Solutions to moral hazard: make hidden actions observable by monitoring. So look to make sure that the worker is operating the ride and not trying to hide behind or trying to make it look like it's broken or something like that. Provide complements that go with the actions you want. And so provide incentives through complements for whatever is the good behavior. Give people a stake in the outcomes. This is a little bit like incentive, but sometimes this would be like stock options or something like that. Pay for performance, basically linking the income your workers earn to measures of their performance. This could be like a per unit piece rate, or it could be like stock compensation. Government rules and social norms help align incentives, towards hard work or whatever. And then solution 5, pick the right kind of agents or have them self-select or self-select out. So the anecdote that I gave was like Zappos, who through the new hire process, they do their training program and they want their customer service to deliver wow. And if you feel after 3 months of Zappos training, you're unable to deliver wow, they'll give you $5,000 as a parting gift. And I think Amazon bought out Zappos and offers something pretty generous. I think it goes from like 5, 10, maybe even 15,000 after, depending on how long you've been there, as a buyout. And the idea is, well, this helps them pick the right kind of agents, those who enjoy their job or want to like kind of take it seriously, want to do a good job, versus those who are just there because they need money and aren't kind of fully bought in, or at least aren't kind of living out the type of the type of job performance that they're looking for. All right, so that's kind of like the quick review. Again, like for the comprehensive cumulative final exam, like you also want to look at the review or look back at stuff from exam 1 and exam 2. But for now, go ahead and conclude here. Don't forget to go over like the graphs and the examples from the book that reinforce the things. I didn't put them in this video. I wanted this not to be so long, since we have like, those other videos to help prepare for the final as well. But anyway, good luck. Hope you enjoyed, and then I'll see you at some point next time.